We're here today with Mick and Judy, and we'll be diving into all things sweat equity as part of a broader portfolio career. And we just thought it was a nice opportunity to actually deep dive into what sweat equity actually is, what it means. And I thought we'd press gang Jude into joining us to get some of her expertise and a little bit of background as to why sweat equity is something that's particularly in where SweatClink came from. So we'll be kind of kicking around themes that we'll have covered in the first couple of podcasts. But I guess maybe to start with, Jude, how did you find yourself here today? How are we in this pod, and where did SweatClink come from?
Well, firstly, thanks for ganging up on me and making me do this podcast. Yeah, I think it's really important, I guess, to hear from the founder behind startups, the reasons why they're building what they're building, how I came to be here. So I was actually a sweat equity partner in SweatClink, believe it or not. I was approached by an entrepreneur, a family member, who had this idea to build a platform that helped other very early stage founders who struggled to raise finance to get their idea off the ground. And he recognized that there was this massive talent pool that could be tapped into. People who were interested in working for equity, which he identified in me, approached me, asked if I would be interested in helping him build this thing with my technical background, my marketing skills as well. It seemed like the kind of perfect match. He had the idea. He had actually tried previously to build the platform himself and didn't manage to get very far. So when that opportunity came my way, thought, well, this sounds like quite an interesting proposition. I could see how it could grow. I could see the impact that it makes on startup businesses, but as well as startup businesses, the talent as well, the people who actually decide to take that risk and work for equity. So essentially that's how I came to be here. I originally started as a sweat equity partner myself. And since then, lots of things have happened, and I now kind of lead on the building of the platform, the company.
Nice. And you mentioned that you thought there was a nice fit, based on technical skills or passions, things like that. How important do you think it is that, when you come to identify the right opportunity, that you consider, are you technically aligned? Does it leverage existing skills? And as talent, how do you kind of make a call as to whether it is the right fit?
I think the first thing is actually thinking, can I help this startup? Can I actually make a meaningful contribution to this startup? And then, of course, there are other things around, do I want to? Is this startup building something that really appeals to me, where I think it's going to do good or make lots of money, if that's what your kind of goal is? So it's asking those really, really quite basic questions first before deciding to dive a bit deeper.
Did you know what sweat equity was when you got involved? This is something that we've been kind of kicking around the last few episodes. Like how prevalent is the knowledge out there around what is sweat equity? Is that changing the more time you spend with it? And did you know what you were getting yourself into at the start?
I did, in terms of this is a business proposition. This is you contribute your work and you own a share in the business. But to actually give it a label, a sweat equity, was, I guess, the first time I'd come across that kind of label that seems to be more used in the tech startup scene, but slowly sort of filtering out into other industries here, I would say.
Nice. I guess one of the big questions that anyone who's listening who might be interested in getting involved in sweat equity will be asking is how to spot the right opportunity, the high value sweat equity opportunity? How have you got any words of wisdom, any kind of stories that you've seen coming through over the last couple of years of success stories in the sweat equity space?
So it's a really tough one to answer, I would say, because everyone's ambitions are a bit different, everyone's interests are a bit different. I would say I would never go into a field or a startup area which I knew nothing about, because it would be really hard for me then to see actually, has this founder, this startup, got what it takes to make it a success in that field without having any of that background knowledge about the industry itself. So for me, I would tend to look at my own industry experience and exposure to things and see whether that marries up with what the founder and the startup is about, and have a look at the trends, I guess, in the industry, or in, if it's a consumer-based startup, the patterns in consumer behavior. Does it look like it's heading towards that direction? So those are kind of like some of the indicators that I look for.
Nice. Vic?
I was just going to say, I had a question about just sort of like in a more general way, and how we tend to be when we're meeting people in real life and just, meeting up and getting to know somebody. What would you say in terms of your experience, not just your own personal experience, but talking to founders and talent, were kind of red flags? Maybe it's, the red flags that might say that maybe things aren't quite what they see. Have you had any experiences of those sort of things?
Yes, absolutely. I have been approached actually by a few startups myself in terms of would I work for equity. For me, red flags are things like, has this founder actually made any progress on their own? I would need to see that the founder is committed to building it, that they're invested in it themselves. Another red flag, I think, is actually treating sweat equity as more like an employee rather than a business partner or somebody who has a stake in the company. So those are two really big red flags, I'd say.
And when you see talent bringing, putting together agreements or coming to you with agreements, do you see a lot of misunderstandings in terms of those kind of definitions, like employee versus partner, or any kind of exploitative practices?
Yes, sometimes I come across some kind of loose agreements where it's either that the founder doesn't quite understand how equity works. So you need to have a kind of foundational understanding of equity, distribution, dilution, the impact on a fundraising journey. I occasionally come across, I guess, agreements where they've maybe agreed an arbitrary figure or a percentage. Usually it's a percentage because everyone seems to talk about equity in percentages rather than in finite shares, which actually is not always the best way to do things, especially if you don't understand how it works. So those are kind of, they could become exploitative depending on the terms that are outlined. It may not be intentional, but yeah, I think not having that basic knowledge and then drawing up contractual agreements when you haven't got that basic knowledge, it doesn't end well for either party, really.
So it can be a bit of a minefield if both parties don't have a good understanding of really what they're going into.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And when you're talking about the percentages, how do you come to those numbers when, as you're going into this for the first time, you're going for your first sweat equity opportunity, suddenly you're faced with a legal document, a contract, and a percentage share of a potential business. I guess the questions are around how do you deal with new legals hitting you for the first time when you may not be massively familiar with this, and how do you determine whether the percentage equity that you're being presented with is any tips, tricks, or tools for working that one out?
So the basis, I guess, for when you're talking about equity compensation calculations really is the valuation. So you really need to arrive at a valuation for the startup that both parties agree on, because from there then it makes the whole calculation make sense, essentially. And if you think about when you go to raise investment, you need to have a valuation in your mind before you start speaking to investors, because otherwise you may be prone to being exploited yourself. So it kind of works in the same way if you think about what sweat equity is, which is essentially it's an investment, but instead of the investment of cash, your partners are investing their time and their skills.
And any recommendations for those, the early stage sweat equity folks who are hitting this for the first time? Anything to look out for there from a documentation or legals perspective?
I would say in terms of valuation, what I do see a lot of, particularly when we're talking about people at such an early stage where it's really difficult to nail a valuation, we do see a lot of overinflated valuations. And I'm not sure where founders are finding these valuations from, but when you're talking at such an early stage, there are a few methods you can go about calculating a sensible valuation. And it's usually a combination of these and then taking a almost kind of like median approach, or seeing what's sensible in terms of how you benchmark against your industry peers.
And it feels like this is a nice opportunity to say that there's probably some content on sweatlink.com for additional reading. So, Mick, I think there's a couple of articles there around getting involved with sweat equity and where to start.
Yes, and we can put some resources in the details about this episode, and I think there's also something on Sweatlink about evaluation.
We've got our recorded webinar that we delivered for an accelerator, which explains the kind of how do you go about these kind of things like valuation, actually understanding equity, giving that really basic foundational knowledge.
And it seems to me that, for anyone who's listening who might be like me maybe a year or so ago, that might be thinking, God, this seems really, really complicated and a little bit overwhelming, that maybe that's the reason why your platform exists as well, because it's not just about sitting on a website. I'm talking from a talent perspective as someone who's looking for an opportunity, but there are lots of resources on the website as well.
Yeah, that's one of the I guess our key pillars is education, because if people don't understand what sweat equity is and they can't see the value in it, they're less inclined to do it. So giving them that knowledge empowers them to make informed decisions.
Yeah, it definitely feels like 12 months ago-ish, very similar position where I was very new to sweat equity, having not been familiar with the concept. I've worked as kind of fractional bits and pieces previously, but this was a whole new world. So I think it's time to start lowering the barrier to entry, because at the moment it still feels like an unknown quantity. Does this have any implications on my tax status? Things like that. If you're new to it, are, like, I don't know, genuine concerns, I guess, to stop people getting involved. And I think SweatLink is a great tool for kind of lowering that barrier and making it much easier to get involved with, in the same way that, you know, retail investors have started to use apps to get involved with share trade, and it feels like this is a nice opportunity to do the same thing.
Yes.
So talking of tax implications and fun stuff, looking at the risk feels like a topic that I'm sure everybody will skew to when they're taking on these things, in the same way that you look at a contract when you start a new job. So it feels to me like it's really important to set clear terms and have that documented and agreed up front, which obviously includes the valuation. Understand your rights to that equity, but also understand how you get out from it. What does that exit strategy genuinely look like? I think this was something that we spoke about in the last episode, but Jude, another question maybe is, what is a good way to exit I think no one suggested that's what's happening here. Any advice for an exit strategy for whatever reason?
So I guess when we talk about exit, it's what do you want to get out of this opportunity? Maybe it's just the thrill of the journey, and it is being part of something innovative, something that I guess you have to think about what it is that you want from being involved as a sweat equity partner. Is it that you're looking for that multi-million-pound exit from the company so that you can come away mega rich and go and live a life on a private yacht? Or is it that you just want to be part of something, and along the way you develop skills that you might never have had the opportunity to develop anywhere else? So there is also career progression that could be a really nice gain from being involved in a startup. Specifically, we're talking about investment exits. When angel investors invest, they're looking for a financial exit. And that kind of ties in as well, whether you are investing sweat equity or you're investing cash. There are only a handful of options really in terms of how you would get a return on your investment when it comes to a financial exit. And that is either the company sells, or it merges, it's acquired by somebody, or they go on and they IPO and they go public. And at that point, then you could potentially sell your shares then. So yeah, I guess the question is looking at what sort of return do you want from being involved as a sweat equity partner?
Yeah, makes all the sense. And do you have a sense of like what makes for a good sweat equity opportunity? If you're an early stage startup and you need a bit of assistance, what is a good opportunity to be posting? Is there such a thing, or is it completely broad and open?
So if you are a startup, what makes it a good opportunity? I probably would say that there are certain types of businesses that sweat equity doesn't particularly work well with. And that's because when we look at why talent invests sweat equity, just like when we look at why angel investors want to invest, they don't want to invest in a company that just treats it as a hobby almost. There's no intention to scale or grow, or there's no intention to kind of like commercialize, which we've heard about today as well. Yeah, so I'd say those kind of opportunities, those kind of what we call lifestyle type businesses, is probably not particularly suited for sweat equity. Really, the opportunities lie in founders who want to build a company that scales, can generate decent amounts of revenue.
Yeah, and it's not just something for tech, is it? It can apply across a multitude of industries, and we've seen some really interesting opportunities on SweatLink, way outside of the kind of tech startup space.
That's right. Yeah, we have some opportunities in food and beverage, for example.
Cleaning.
That's right. Yeah. Here's a cleaning platform that's like a marketplace that matches cleaners with people looking for cleaners.
Basically, any startup or small business, sweat equity can be applicable. If you're kind of looking to grow the business and you've not necessarily got a massive budget, you can be offering sweat equity pretty broadly. It's not just about software engineers.
Yeah, the kind of talent that is being sought after by startups ranges from engineering or technical through to marketing, sales, or financial. It could be the types of roles, could be operational, or it could be more strategic or advisory.
Perfect. And I guess when you consider a portfolio career, it kind of implies that there's a couple of different aspects woven in. We obviously, sweat equity is close to our heart and can take up a decent chunk of time. So if you consider, the opportunities now, if you're breaking away from the 9 to 5, you've got mentoring, you've got freelancing, taking on some contract work, sweat equity, spinning up a business yourself. How do you juggle multiple projects, multiple work streams without burning yourself out, essentially?
I would say that's more a question for you.
Coping mechanisms. I mean, I think from my side, just being able to prioritize effectively, try and loop in some tools to help you manage time, but also manage tasks. Make sure you're effectively, I was going to say shooting the alligators closest to the boat, but that kind of implies a failure of prioritization. But bringing in, I guess for me, product tooling, road mapping, prioritization really helps me. But it also helps to shut down, if possible, in certain days, so that you are locked in to a particular topic on that day. The cross-pollination.
Yeah, the context switching as well can be really difficult.
Yeah.
So trying to balance that I'm not doing one thing. I mean, I wouldn't even dream of trying to do 2 different roles in one morning. And then actually more and more I try and keep the similar roles for the same day or 2 even, depending on how high level it is. Because some things it's quite nice to batch. And just while you're in the mood and you're in the zone, you can do them. I think the biggest thing for me is boundaries. Because when you're working for more than one person or one thing, is being able to, or even family who don't pay you anything, although sometimes you might get chocolates, biscuits, whatever, is actually the boundaries and thinking about what is it that I can actually realistically do. And that's, for me, is really super important because, I don't know, maybe it's a female thing, I don't know, but it's that constant overextension. I don't think it is a woman thing. I actually think it's to do with wanting to please, wanting to do a good job. And we can very often overextend ourselves. I've been guilty of that.
And learning to say no.
Yes.
I think that's a massively undervalued skill. I think we were talking about this the other day, and I know that I've got something lined up later this week that I've been requested to get into, but physically can't make that happen. But to your point about wanting to do a good job and wanting to kind of to please, it feels like that could potentially be at your own detriment. There's only a finite number of hours in the day, and there's only a finite number of jobs you can pull off effectively. So it feels important to say no and draw those boundaries, because otherwise it's just going to snowball, right? That's going to get out of hand quite quickly.
It's a real thing, you know, the burnout and not being able to have time to really just decompress. Sleep is pretty important, and breathe, you know, is crucial, really. So that's been a big thing for me, and certainly coming into the new year, I think it's something that I'm, you know, really going to try and focus on so that I can enjoy more of the things that I do that bring me a lot of joy, and really fill that kind of good feeling bucket. I think it's called dopamine. But yeah, I'm going for that.
Sounds good. Sounds like we should all listen to that. Any particular tools that you use to kind of manage your time? Any shout outs for anyone struggling?
Okay, so I think that, you know, it's easy to say no or boundaries, and those are very vague concepts, but I think it's really helpful to write down, if you're not quite sure of what that means and whether you are managing, is really to begin with auditing your day or your week and figuring out what it is that you're doing. Because as soon as you start doing that, if you're looking at it and going, oh my gosh, you know, no wonder. As soon as you start looking at those lists, you see why you're completely like drained and zapped by the end of the day. And I think that things like using timers are really useful, because often we overextend because we're panicking and overwhelmed. So just, you know, work in units. If you've got a bad back, 30-minute units. If you can do 45, do 45. Get up, stretch. It's not waiting till the end of the day to do, like, to go to the bathroom, people. You know, I mean, it's such a simple thing, and I hate to be talking about it, you know, and being recorded, but we've got to look after our basic needs. But yeah, tools like using timers, auditing your day. When I'm particularly in, like, there's too much going on and I'm feeling a bit overwhelmed, the last thing I write at night is the list of everything that I've done. And that's a really good way of going to bed, reminding yourself of what you've done, maybe reminding yourself you've done too much, but just to give yourself a pat on the back.
Yeah, that's definitely something, as from speaking from the founder side, when you have to wear so many hats, something I need to get better at is actually, and I have found myself in moments where I think, what have I done today? When I know I've just been so busy, but I can't put my finger on what I've actually achieved. And getting better at actually recording although I work from a calendar and I work from Notion to manage my tasks list, there's so many things that come in between that just pop up, like emails I need answering, that kind of thing, that don't get recorded on the calendar or don't get recorded on Notion. And it's actually recognizing that those things take a lot of your time as well.
Yeah, it feels like that's a solution for everyone, whether, you know, you're a founder, sweat equity partner, or full-time employee. Realizing that stuff like that, the emails, the random tasks that need performing, that's a very valid use of time, and that is working. Whether it's achieving that ultimate goal for the day, you know, it's almost by the by. You are putting the work in, you are putting the graft in at that point, and celebrating those wins is important, because otherwise you'll get to the end of the day and think, oh, I've put out fires and not actually achieved anything. I think that's how you end up going into that burnout route, and you don't understand what's happening. So I think celebrating the small wins, like keeping a empty inbox, should be celebrated, regardless of what it is that you're doing.
And a side of documenting for someone who is, you know, perhaps developing a portfolio career, by writing those things down. When you're freelance, you're constantly having to vie for work, create a scope, looking through wherever you write it, looking through that can remind you of actually the things that you've done. And sometimes when people say to you, so what have you done recently that you were really successful about? What challenges? That actually can be an opportunity to look at that and remind yourself of all those kind of projects and things that you've done that you thought, wow, that was amazing.
100% agree on that one. It's almost like your year wrapped, sweat equity wrapped. There you go. Talking of wrapping, we're getting close to our time. One of the last points that I think was bouncing around my brain was around building personal brand. And I think I was considering this from a talent perspective and the need to kind of position yourself as an expert of sorts, to demonstrate value. I think that's where this one has ultimately come from. Do you think that's necessarily hugely important from the founder side when you're looking for a marketer or a product manager? Are you looking at someone who has a very strong personal brand, who has positioned themselves as an expert in their field? Is that particularly important?
I would say that someone who has, if a talent has a strong personal brand, then they would get more opportunities, I guess, presented to them for sure. We see a lot of applications through our platform where there's just not enough information on the talent profile, that it doesn't say very much about them at all, apart from maybe their key professional skills. But as a founder, you probably want to know a bit more, and that, okay, you've convinced me you can do the job in terms of your professional skills, but do I really want to give part of my company to you? So I would say it is very important, and it is certainly something that a founder would consider and be looking at.
Nice. And just like in terms of achieving that, it feels like maintaining a personal brand presence on the social platforms is a no-brainer. You want to kind of almost set your stall out using the tools that are kind of readily available, but also SweatClink gives you the opportunity to kind of talk a little bit more about your background and really kind of show who you are when you're applying for those roles. So it feels like that might be one to really take seriously if you've got a bit of an interest in moving into the sweat equity space.
Yeah, and I guess there's also the thing to consider is that perhaps on professional networks like LinkedIn, you want to present a certain persona, but maybe you actually have this really entrepreneurial streak inside you, which doesn't come across in your professional profile, because you want to maintain a certain persona on that platform. So SweatClink gives you the ability to really actually express that entrepreneurial side that exists.
And if we were looking into the new year, depending on when this goes out, what are your predictions for the sweat equity space?
I see. Watch this space. Yes, there's a session announcements that I can't talk about yet. So yeah, definitely watch this space. There's going to be a lot happening, definitely in terms of supporting the talent side of sweat equity. Yeah, so that's all I can say.
Nice. Well, we're excited. As always, we'd love to hear stories. So if you have been getting involved in a portfolio career or have sweat equity ventures live at the moment, share your progress with us on social media using @SweatClink, or get in touch using the contact section on sweatclink.com. And I think it's fair to say that we're excited to see where the year takes us, and we'll be keeping a close eye on the stories that are out there.
Yeah, we really genuinely want to hear from everyone at whatever stage you're at. Newbie, experienced, entrepreneur. If you've got a story to tell, we want to hear it. We want this to be more of a conversation. So yeah, contact us.
Great stuff. And that's it for us today. Thank you so much for joining us, Jude.
Or forcing me to do.
Thank you.